Chord scales, what are they and how can they serve me in making music? Well, chord scales are one of the most valuable tools for a musician because what that allows you to do is generate ideas. And it isn't just restricted to chords, but we're going to specifically address chord voicings, and we're going to build these chords via intervals. This will be a good tool on the guitar because intervals end up being shapes on the guitar, and on the fingerboard, don't you use shapes many times to help you organize information. All right, so chord scales. The definition of a chord scale is simply you take each note in the structure, be it a chord, an interval, even a riff, and you move it up or down to the next note in the scale. We're going to be basing everything out of the key of E. Now, if you look at chart number 1, the key of E is spelled E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp. We have 4 sharps, and you probably know how to play that on the guitar. You might do it like this, up in the 11th position, starting with your second finger on E. So you go. Well, the way you see it on the neck is great for single note work, but you can't really play chords when you have more than one note on a string. Because by definition, when you play a chord on the guitar, don't you have to set it up so you have one note per string, right? That's how we're going to be viewing this, and that's going to present a little bit of a challenge because you're not used to seeing things in this long diagonal line from right to left, from lower pitch strings to higher pitch strings. But we'll deal with that little by little. All right, so chord scales. Now you understand what the concept is. How is this going to generate ideas? Well, if we're dealing with a 7-note scale, which the major scale has 7 different notes, doesn't it stand to reason that if I play some chord structure, I'm playing notes out of that E major scale, couldn't I move each note in the chord up to the next note in the scale, and how many times could I do that? Well, if I look at this, here I have a chord structure. We'll talk about these later on, but I'm just using this as an example. So if I take each note and I move it up to the next note in the E major scale, I'm going to get... and so on. So you get these really great... and you can hear the continuity as you move them. You hear these simultaneous melodies because each string, each voice in the chord is a melody. That's what the whole premise is of this course. This course, I want to stipulate, is a huge undertaking because you're going to see the big picture. You're going to be overwhelmed. You're going to say, wait a minute. I can barely scratch the surface. But that's the beauty of this, is that it helps you see the whole universe of options in terms of chords, single note lines, and all kinds of things. And because we're going to exhaust different combinations of intervals, you're going to run across some things that are not very guitaristic. They're not going to lie on the instrument very well, but that doesn't matter because I want you to change the way you think. I don't want you to be a guitarist. I want you to be a musician and say, all right, I see a note, and I see a note, and I want those notes. And you're going to do whatever you have to do, which means we're going to be doing some two-handed things, which may be impractical, and you may not want to use that right now, but at least you'll say, oh, I see the note there, and I see the note there, and if I wanted to do that, I'd have to use 2 hands. Or you'd record 2 tracks, and we're going to talk about how to do that, or you get a buddy to play one part, and you'd play the other part, so you could get these close voicings. But again, I'm going to talk more and more about that as we go through these voicings. All right, so chord scales. Now you understand what this chord scale idea is, and this is the same principle that allows you to see the diatonic triads in a key. You're moving each note in the chord up to the next note in the scale, and that generates these different harmonies based off of each scale degree, okay? And knowing that, it's going to help you organize these chord voicings. But the cool thing is, not only are you going to have 7 different chord voicings, all coming from one particular voicing, but you're then going to be able to apply them over the 6 jam tracks that I provided. Now, the jam tracks are real simple. Here's the first one. Just a funk drum groove. So there we have an E in the bass, right? If we're in the key of E, that means we're playing the 1 chord. The chord built off the first step of the scale. So let's go back to this voicing that I just demonstrated, and don't worry about learning this. You're going to learn this down the road. But if I take this and I move it through the scale, every time I play it, I'm going to be playing different scale degrees. This is where chart number 2 comes into play. So if I'm playing this in the key of E with an E bass note, and I happen to have a 3, a 5, a 6, and a 2, so I've got a 6-9 chord, right? Real pretty, lush harmony, right? And as I move this through the scale, It sounds different. Isn't it going to sound different because you're playing different scale degrees? So then you analyze it. You say, oh, I'm playing a 4, a 6, a 7, and a 3. Okay, so that's why it sounds a little strange, because you got a 3 and a 4 in there. And then if I move it up, but you have this continuity, as I said earlier, of these structures. The continuity is because they're using the same intervallic stacking, so you can use these, and here's where the fun part comes into play. What I'm going to do is just present this information. I'm not going to show you what to play. That's your job for the rest of your life, is to take these chord voicings and know where to look for getting these sounds. I use the analogy of a big rollaway toolbox. I have a big stainless steel rollaway because I'm a motorhead, and I used to have motorcycles and all that business. So I know where all my tools are. So I know where to look to get this particular tool, and I know where to look to get this particular tool, right? Your job as a musician is in your brain to know where to go for certain sounds, and on your instrument as a guitarist to know where to go to get those particular sounds. So that's what this course is going to point you. It's going to point you in that direction so that you see the big picture and you just start chipping away, learning information, and this is, I guarantee this is going to help you see things in a whole different fashion on the neck. It won't be easy because you're not going to be able to rely on patterns. You're going to have to think about notes. So if you're not accustomed to doing that, well, now's as good a time as ever to learn how to think about notes. All right, so I just demonstrated that chord voicing over an E bass, right? And you heard, okay, it's got a particular sound, right? Now, if I'm by myself, I don't have a bass track or anything like that, I can play that bass note, because aren't we guitar players? Don't we love to play in the keys of E, A, and D, because we've got our wonderful roots as open strings, and we can just play and hit that open string or play a chord, and it's like the left hand of the piano. It's real easy. It doesn't tie up a finger. But if I wanted to hear this chord with a different bass note, here's how we approach it. Now, the big picture is that you have 12 different notes in music. So I could play that structure with an E in the bass, or an F in the bass, or an F sharp, and just ascend through my chromatic scale. We're not going to do that in this course. We're going to stay in the key of E. You may get bored, but we're going to take the key of E, and once you learn it there, you can transpose it to any key you want. So what would be the next note in the bass line? Wouldn't it be an F sharp? So when I play the F sharp bass, the bass note determines what you hear sonically as a chord, as a sonority. Well, technically, you suddenly have to start doing some things that may be difficult. I don't like to use that word. We'll just say different. Challenging is probably a better word. And you might run into intonation issues, or it may indeed be impractical, or you may not have the dexterity to do that. I've provided jam tracks that give you different bass notes in the key of E. So your second jam track simply has the same drum groove, but the bass line is now an F sharp instead of an E. So let's listen to these chords with the F sharp bass note. Cool sound, right? And here's why. And it seems like they all sort of work, didn't they? Here's why. In the key of E, F sharp is what number? Look at your chart number 1 if you don't know this, or better yet, just memorize this. I just went up a whole step. So 2 is always a whole step higher than 1. What is mode 2? The Dorian mode, which simply means you're taking an E major scale, but instead of starting on E and ending on E, you start on F sharp and end on F sharp. It's aligned with a minor tonality because if you look at the chart number 1, you see diatonic triads, the 2 chord is a minor. Diatonic 7th chord, the 2 chord is a minor 7. So it's aligned over that 2 chord. The 2 chord was generated because you took the 1 chord, the E chord, and you moved each note up to the next note in the E scale, and that gave you an F sharp minor. So now we are in F sharp Dorian. If you look at chart number 2, I have written out the notes in the key of E for almost 2 complete octaves. And then I've numbered the modes. So if you play your scale, and this is what you should eventually know. This is a process, takes time, but you want to memorize this sort of information. If I play an E scale, I know that, or rather, if I'm playing an E major scale over an E bass note, and I'm in E Ionian, then E is 1, F sharp is 2, and so on, just as the chart designates. But if I'm playing over a bass line that's F sharp, I now have to number things according to the F sharp bass note. So it's right there for you. The F sharp would be 1, the G sharp would be the 2, the A would be the flat 3, and so on. So every time you play any of the chord structures that I'm going to demonstrate and present to you, every time you play them over one jam track, you'll be in a particular mode and the notes are functioning numerically a particular way. If you change your jam track, the jam track places you in a new mode. Well, let's see about this. Let's go to the next jam track. It has the G sharp in the bass. And what do my chords sound like now? Whole different sound. That's because if I did an analysis, the numbers would be different. Now this is real important. Theory is not complicated. It's sort of a large concept in that you have 12 notes and you have all these permutations, but it's really not that complicated when you think in terms of what we're doing here. The scale is adjacent numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Certain notes may be sharped or flatted. Chords are built in thirds, every other note. And so you just start to build this information together. Now you might say, well, wait a minute, I don't want to be thinking this hard. All right, I can appreciate that. In that case, all I want you to do is just use your ears. And as a matter of fact, I want you to do that first, for a while. I want you to take some of these chord voicings and just play them against the jam tracks, and the ones you like, write a tune with them. Do something. Implement them into your playing. Because once you've got it to where you can play it, you know what it's going to sound like, that pre-hearing concept, then you can start looking at the theory, and that generates more ideas. It allows you to go here, 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 wherever. All right, so let's review what I've just explained. We're going to talk about chord scales in this group of lessons. Definition of a chord scale: whatever you're playing, you move each note up to the next note in the scale. So technically, when I do this, if I play a scale, I'm taking each note and moving it up to the next note in a scale. So it sort of qualifies as a chord scale by definition. If I play a pair of notes, and you can hear the scale coming into play, you hear these two simultaneous major scales. So that's the definition of the chord scale. Then the other concept is the modal application, where whatever you're playing with this group of chords, which is a chord scale, if you change the bass note, you can use it another way. That's the beauty of this. So you're going to learn 6 different ways to use these chord voicings. You might say, oh, now wait a minute, I thought the major scale has 7 different notes. It does. I'm not including the Locrian mode, which would be mode 7, because it's not the kind of mode you're going to park on, so we don't need to address that right now. At most, and I say this in many of my courses, you don't stay on the Locrian mode for more than a couple of beats, 4 beats at the most, so we don't need to worry about that. But the other 6 modes, Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixed Lydian, and Aeolian, those are your common modes, and you encounter them whether you know it or not. When you play a song, when the chords change, you're in that mode, okay? So I want you to study what I've just said in this course, in this lesson, and then we're going to talk about intervals of seconds and thirds, and those will be our building blocks for quite a while.